Greetings. For COMM 507 today, we are talking about don't know responses. How much do they really don't know, and what can we learn from it? Okay, so let's look at this kind of basic survey here. We have the strongly agree to strongly disagree scale type, and look at this option, no opinion, do not agree or disagree, undecided. Although this is slightly extreme, this does represent one of the big problems with don't know. The fact that we literally don't know what's going through their mind with this example. We can't learn anything from the information because we just don't know if the respondents truly don't know, resulting from ignorance. They simply don't agree or disagree, and they fall into a moderate or neutral category, or they just don't want to say, possibly due to concerns of how their response will be perceived, the image they're trying to portray, or other social-based factors. Now, let's consider the reasoning behind survey responses. Let's think about the true-false question items. When people respond to this, we assume they know the answer based on whether they're right or wrong, or at the very least, we assume they think they're right. So responses to survey questions are assumed to be based on knowledge, or when people draw from experiences from memory. As Beatty and colleagues explain, though, when responses say they don't know, or DK, the answer, then we might assume their response indicates a lack of knowledge, or from a lack of memory or experience to make an educated guess. Their team identified several cognitive recall states that respondents used to draw on information. Let's look at these four. First is available. The information is known and readily available. We know everything. Accessible. Individuals have the information needed, but it might not be instantly available. They may need to think about it a little bit more, exert a little more cognitive effort. Generatable. We don't know the information, but maybe we have enough experience about relatable situation to make an educated guess. Or ignorant. We don't know the answer, there's nothing to make an educated guess. Now the second part of this is an adequacy judgment. That's necessary when a potential response involves uncertainty, estimation, or guessing. It's part of the accessible or generatable cognitive states. Think about it this way. If you're asked how many times you log onto social media last week, you probably won't know for certain unless the answer is once or none. But maybe you like checking every couple hours, and you're using your phone or computer for at least 14 hours of the day. So you can assume that 7 times per day you're logging into social media. So 7 times 7, we can assume between 49 and 50 times per week you log onto social media. It's good enough to make a guess. So that would be an example of an adequacy judgment. Now the next one is communicative intent. Whether the respondent believes they have enough knowledge to provide the answer or whether they choose to respond at all. Social desirability may be part of this. If someone asks me about how often I drink, I may not want to report the exact amount, especially if it's rather high. When I was pregnant with each of my kids, for every visit, they would always ask me how much I drink or smoke per week, if at all. I would always respond never. And then one time I asked a rather inappropriate question back. How often do they actually have women who say yes? And the nurse responded, you would be surprised. But if you think about this in a face-to-face response, when the question is posed, there can be a desire to conform to expectations or answer with a more socially desirable response. So first we start with the cognitive state. Then we have the adequate substantive response needed. And then it's going to depend whether we give a truthful response or if we want to avoid it. Okay, so part of this relates to sensitive questions. There was one study from Mueller and Schmiedberg about whether respondents get used to answering sensitive questions over time. They explained that questions that provoke answers aligned with social norms may lead participants to over-report socially desirable and under-report socially undesirable behaviors and attitudes, but also refuse to answer altogether to avoid embarrassment from providing a socially undesirable answer. They conducted a longitudinal study asking sensitive questions about sexuality and fertility, suspecting that participants would be less sensitive to questions over time. The negative reactions to privacy would likely be stronger at the beginning, but maybe it would reduce over time. Although they did find fewer DK responses to sensitive questions over time, it appears this was more related to aging and specific life situations. In other words, people are more or less likely to answer sensitive questions based on their own personal situation in life rather than becoming more confident and reassured to answer those sensitive questions. Sensitive questions are going to plague us or not. Now, researchers have tested other different techniques types of survey questions, whether to provide an option for don't know at all on a questionnaire, or other methods of encouraging more response and more information from participants. Luskin and Bullock described 3 ways of asking a question with non-response, including DK encouraging, in which questions are worded to tell participants to choose DK if you simply don't know. DK neutral, in which there is no don't know option, but a spontaneously volunteered don't know is accepted. And then last, DK discouraging. This is when they're probed with a follow-up question. One hypothesis is that DK responses are due to less cognitive effort. If you force answers, there's likely to be a measurement error by leading the participant to give a response instead of their true opinion. Now, from what articles I reviewed, there's kind of a mixed results of success. Luskin and Bullock's work on probing for more responses has some fairly strong validity. Let's look at this. Kuhan colleagues tested probing by using face-to-face interviews in 3 countries. Each participant was either assigned to a treatment or probing group or a control group. The control group participants who gave don't know responses were not probed. In the treatment group, if they gave a don't know response, they were read a probing statement asking for the answer that comes closest to what you think. Now, if they still gave a don't know response, it was then accepted. They also tested 2 types of questions, pseudo-knowledge and attitudinal questions. They found the probe groups were less likely to select categories at extreme ends of the response scale. They tend to select the middle item. Now, it's possible people give an unconsidered response, similar to guessing, in which probing is not useful at all and just adds extra noise to our data. Or it could be because these are genuine attitudes, that they literally are more moderate. Now, they dived into the data further. They went and looked at, They looked at how people answered to similar questions, whether they answered don't know to some questions or don't know to others, and whether when they were probed, if those new answers were close to the ones that they had already answered to. Now, the authors found probing could decrease systematic differences between the missing and observed data and thus reduce potential non-response bias. But the downside is the added time and cost. Persistent probing could have consequences for participants who are frustrated by probing or a measurement effect. Now, another study, Trunk and colleagues developed a model that shows that discouraging DK responses, in other words, encouraging guesses, improves the measurement of knowledge, but only when it increases educated guesses more than increases blind guesses. Let's look at that a little bit more. Now, their study was a 2x3 factorial design. They used science questions as the topic, evolution-based, and they also randomized the order of the correct answer. Now, they wanted to look at whether pressing people to answer, whether they know or not, just adds noise or not. And that's what they actually found. But there's a caveat. If discouraging don't know encourages educated guesses based on pre-existing knowledge, then it increases validity. If discouraging don't know responses encourages blind guesses because we simply don't know, then it just adds noise. So now if we go back to the argument of the cognitive effort exerted, and that don't know responses can be an indicator that someone doesn't want to make the effort, some research has questioned this. In this study by Graham, he proposes that we don't know means they're not sure, based on the idea of a threshold level of confidence. If they're not at least 60% confident, they answer don't know for knowledge, attitude, or behavior questions. Graham analyzed confidence distribution of questions. He noted a pattern for similar types of question types, but when you compare the different topics, they're different. Now, part of the reason for this could be because different questions rely on people to make different types of inferences. For example, questions about whether John Roberts is more likely to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court or Secretary of Defense, most people either know or they don't. If you're guessing, you know or you don't know. But for questions about whether unemployment has gone up or not, you might have a basis for this based on whether you've heard about it yourself, from friends, from family, or from being unemployed. You can maybe infer the answer. The main takeaway is that high don't know responses isn't always an indication of participants not paying attention, but simply the fact that maybe the questions are too confusing, too complex, or it's less obvious than hoped. Now, in another study by Saris and colleagues, they tested the quality of responses to survey questions that have agree, disagree response options compared to issue-specific response options. Now, the agree, disagree question is formatted like, to what extent do you agree or strongly disagree that your health is excellent? The issue specific would be, how would you rate your health? Excellent, very good, good, fair, or bad? Now, it turns out from their study, the 80 scale questions were of lower quality for them. But why is this? Because the cognitive processes entailed in answering an agree, disagree question is more likely to be burdensome and complex, more cognitively demanding. The issue specific response questions avoid acquiescence, they minimize cognitive burdens. They produce answers with monotonic relations, with underlying constructs of interest. However, if people lacked enough information, the agree, disagree was more reliable. Now, why is this important for don't know, no responses? It's a similar reasoning. Just as we see in the agree, disagree scales, less cognitive effort means less reliable. One of the dangers of DK responses is less cognitive effort. Now, another aspect of question form is the neither nor or the midpoint instead of the don't know response. The hidden don't know response is a type of social desirability responding. It's when people who genuinely don't know select the middle alternative instead of admitting their ignorance by selecting don't know. To test the neither nor as a neutral response or lack of opinion, in one study, Sturgis and colleagues administered an experiment. Anyone who selected neither nor received a follow-up question, and those who didn't choose lack of opinion or neutral were asked to describe it in their own words, how they responded. The authors found that the majority of neither nor responses tend to be the result of holding no opinion rather than actual neutrality. Now, why is this? Sturgis and colleagues explained that this is likely because many individuals may regard the admission of ignorance on matters of public policy as socially embarrassing, and hence will select the neither nor alternative as a face-saving way of saying don't know. Now, when adding the don't know option, 7% more selected that. It didn't impact the neither nor response. It doesn't increase the rate of hidden don't knows, but it supports the idea of what's called satisficing. Now, 3 possibilities occur with this. Satisficing holds an opinion, but you select the midpoint and you exert less cognitive effort. Those with a neutral opinion, but no option, select forced directional responses. And then the no opinion, but select the midpoint to say don't know. The authors demonstrate that motivation to employ a face-saving don't know response strategy derives from a desire to avoid social embarrassment among respondents who feel they should have an opinion on important issues. So these are some of our conclusions from our chat today. Don't know responses provide little, if any, information. It can be a result of too much cognitive effort required, refusal to respond, neutral beliefs, fear of consequences. Research indicates that probing can help, but can also provide too much noise to data. It's more useful if it helps with educated guessing. Here is also a list of some of the citations used for this research. And if you have any questions or otherwise, please do post them. I would love to chat about this more. I didn't provide everything because I thought it would take longer than it did, but it turns out I talk really fast. So we're only at 13 minutes. If you have any questions, please post. This has been a really fascinating topic to get to know, and I'd love to chat about it more.